This episode of Game Masters Hall is sponsored by The Deck of Many and Level Up Dice.
Hi everybody, welcome back to Game Masters Hall. I'm Eric Campbell, and today we're talking to Sam Leve about game crunching. Sam, thank you so much for being here.
I'm looking forward to talking about consuming systems and crunching them.
Yes, indeed. Now, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions just right off the bat. Is it true that you are my best friend?
You know, on extensive analysis, I have found that, in fact, yes, I am your best friend.
I had that same observation.
Excellent.
Indeed. And is it true that you have helped me both digest, crunch, and otherwise obliterate systems that have been tricky to learn quickly?
Quickly, slowly, at any speed whatsoever, but it is my preferred recreational activity, ideally with you.
Yeah, I have to say, one of the things that I love that you and I talked about when we were getting deep into the Star Trek Adventure system is we talked more and more about the possibility of doing more projects where, as you put it, you wanted Sax Carr to just hand you a stack of books and be like, crunch these games and get back to me by the end of the week.
We did get to know each other on receiving game systems on about a 24-hour preparation period before I had to join you.
Yeah.
And that was the first time that I had learned to crunch systems quickly.
That was the Star Wars game, right?
The Star Wars game, but also the Doctor Who game.
That's right, yeah. So that's a lot of things. So that's something I really want the audience to know about you, because a lot of people don't know how, you could write a thesis on game systems. You've taken classes at UCLA, is that correct?
USC.
USC. Oh God, they're gonna kill me for that. The rivalry, right? There's rivalry? There's a rivalry.
Bit,
Right,
yeah.
I'm gonna die. Well, anyway, so it was nice talking to everybody. So you took classes at USC specifically on game crunching and game design, is that correct? Yeah, and so this is something that is deeply important to you. You're very passionate about this.
I love game design, not just because it allows me to better appreciate the games that I'm playing, because I can appreciate all of the elements of craft that went into making them, but it elevates my understanding of the game as someone who participates in it, because I can better leverage the system as intended to make cooler stories happen and to have sharper interactions at the table.
The thing about that is it's interesting because for a while I noticed that there was starting to be, I noticed in myself that I started kind of talking negatively about crunch systems because I was getting so into narrative systems. And I think the reason why that was happening is because I think a lot of players can get intimidated by crunch and pushed away from it. Like for example, my favorite example of a crunchy game is Polaris, which is, that game has got some rules, man. Like but it is so beautifully narrative laid out and so interesting. But I got really intimidated by it. And it was really helpful to have you come along who can find that balance, understands crunch, and can break it down succinctly so I can understand exactly what they were going for. But I have noticed that D&D is a good example of a game that has found a level of simulationism, but has not stepped into the realm of crunch per se. It's got crunch, obviously, with spells and whatnot. Would you say that D&D has struck a pretty decent balance between the two?
D&D is very aware of where it does and doesn't want crunch. That it has a lot of tactical intensity and tactical depth around combat, but you look at just how light the social rules are.
Right.
Compared to a game like Burning Wheel, which has systematized battles of wits and has created mechanics for social interaction, in contrast to D&D, where social interaction is roughly guided by charisma rolls, but is effectively freeform compared to the tactics of combat.
Right. I've seen that in Exalted. Exalted had a whole chapter on social combat, and man, it was like warfare with charms and ways to navigate and counter your opponents in the middle of courtroom settings or whatnot.
And I think breaking down crunch as a big scary idea can help games with a lot of rules seem less intimidating. Certainly, I didn't always know all the rules.
Right.
There were times when I was scared of games and thought they were too crunchy. What helped me was to understand that some kinds of crunch are about creating tactical depth in combat, like D&D. Games like Polaris might have simulationist rules that increase the sense of immersion. Or when you look at Battletech, maybe you're in the middle of a combat and all of a sudden, doesn't it kind of seem weird? Wouldn't these things build up heat? Mm-hmm. And that can be immersion breaking for some players. And so a game designer might feel the same way. And then you have a heat mechanic to answer a call for immersion. That is really about supporting, making someone feel like they're in the game.
Right.
Just like narrative.
What are some of the markers that you look for when you come across that? And what are some of the things you recommend to players when they come across crunchy systems who might be struggling with them?
One of the things I like to find in crunchy systems, or in any system really, is a variation of tactical depth. When we look at a game like D&D, there are classes that I remember as a first-time player I didn't look at. I didn't try to play a full spellcaster first.
Right.
I would offer something like a rogue, where the actions are fairly straightforward, you have a little bit of variety so you don't get bored, and you also get the feeling of doing something awesome. So that you can just absolutely nail a stealth roll or roll a ton of d6. And those can both coexist within the same game. A game that we have a sense of its overall level of crunch, but there's internal variation as well. And so when a player might be intimidated, I would encourage a game master to look through the rules, look through which aspects might be more friendly to that specific player. When you have someone like Elisa, she may not have been very used to all of the emergent interactions of multiple rule sets, but she's a brilliant professional improviser. She's intensely creative, and by having her in the science station, she was able to use those creatively and achieve the effect of the rules through you. Say, I want to do this kind of thing, and you, as the game master who understood the rules, figured out a way to make that happen.
Right.
And so players should never be afraid to lean on their game masters for that sort of thing.
So I mentioned before that one of the things that I love to do, and that Sax joked about, you guys talking about like handing y'all game systems, you know how much you have been on the receiving end, like so many people in my life, of how many damn games that I want to run. Like I'm always pulling, in this regard, I am very much like Jackson Lansing. Like I'm always grabbing games and I'm like, I want to run this. And you have been the person where I'm just like, Sam, like take that please and tell me how it works and I want to run it. And so I'm curious, what do you have, what advice could you give to beginners or people like me, ADHD, like has trouble digesting information from reading it? Like what could you tell me and advice could you give for people who want to pick up these game systems like Battletech, which is a great game, but might be intimidating to somebody who can't really process all those rules all at once?
Absolutely. The good news is that part of a well-designed game is information design. It is not something that we really talk about or appreciate, but
like
laying
layout?
the order of information in an intuitive manner so I know roughly when I'm going to learn about how to build a character. Just the simple setup is part of what the game designer has already done for you.
So the first thing that I think of is Forbidden Lands by Free League Publishing. I was able to process the rules because of the way they laid it out. Is that something like what you're talking about? How they just like, they hit the right beats when they're disseminating the rules?
Yes, it's a lot like telling a story. When you as the reader start to have a question of, okay, but how do I roll dice like that? A well-designed book is going to, as soon as that question starts to appear in your mind, oh, hey, look, here's the rules on how I roll dice like that. Anticipating the thought process. And that itself often helps a lot. You look at the order of how this book intended to give you the information, it might help. But I know that the very first times when I was thrown in the deep end with you, when I had a day to learn these games, and then I'm going to go on stream with this brand new GM, and no pressure, no pressure, no pressure, no pressure, no pressure. When I was still new and very intimidated, the way I approached it was simply to sit down and focus on building a character. And by doing that, it raises questions of, what do these characters do in this game? then I learned that. How would someone be good at slicing a computer?
Mm-hmm. And how
then I go and I check that.
Right. Okay.
And by simply creating a single character, I have learned a lot about the mechanics that are going to be relevant to me, that specific player.
Interesting.
Starting out, I don't need to know everything. And I never put it on myself to need to know everything when I start.
That's really interesting because as a game master, I often shoot myself in the foot immediately because I open these books and I'll get into it. And there's a lot of amazing games out there that don't have great, like they don't necessarily disseminate the rules information in a very succinct way. And so as a result, someone like me, I often end up feeling stupid or like I can't get this game down or this is just, or I'll get frustrated. I hadn't thought about, I know that there is something to be said about taking it piece by piece, but I hadn't thought of it from, what's fascinating about taking it from the character standpoint, like you were saying, is that makes it fun. That makes it, that's part of like, now you're crafting something from nothing and learning the rules along the way.
Exactly. So even for game masters who want to learn a new system, try making a martial character, then making a spellcaster. You will learn the martial rules in an isolated environment, then you'll learn the magic system rules, and it's sort of a self-contained order of operation. So as someone who came into these games as an optimizer and was learning how to optimize a martial character, I end up learning so much about the rules. The player's perspective of power gaming is really a great introduction to learning game design.
Will you please build mechs with me? Aww. I want to learn how to build mechs. That'll help me. That'll help me get down. I will get down. No. Well, on that note, before we go, let's go ahead and check in with Xander, who's with Emily of Level Up Dice.
Another classic Campbell cliffhanger. But to foil that, we've got Emily.
Hi. I want to talk to you a little bit about the process that goes into turning a new material into dice.
Okay.
Obviously, we're all familiar with plastic dice.
Sure.
But these days, you can turn such a wide variety of materials into dice. You can have stone dice, wood dice, bone dice, metal dice.
You could dice anything.
You could dice anything. But the thing is, every time we bring a new material into the fold, there's actually a lot of work that goes into making sure we can do it.
Sure.
So every new material isn't necessarily going to work with the processes we already have in place for carving and engraving the dice that we already make. With any new material, like say we're bringing a new stone into the mix, we've got to do a lot of research and development in terms of testing the strength and the crystalline structure of that stone to make sure that we can develop a cutting method that will cut the stone most efficiently and effectively.
And this is the amethyst one.
This is an amethyst one, just to give you an idea.
So cool.
So also, once we move into the engraving, of course, every material is going to have its own tensile strength, so they're all going to react to the engraving process a little differently.
Sure.
So we often have to figure out what material we're using to cut and engrave, what is the process that's going to be the most efficient and effective for that particular stone or that particular material we're bringing into the fold.
Oh man.
It sounds like a lot of work, but
Yeah.
we do it so that players are happy with the dice that are in their hands. So
Thank
next
you.
time, of course.
Yeah.
But next time you're playing with a really special set of dice, take a second to look at them and really think about all the people and all the processes that went into turning that material into your special dice.
Well, thank you so much. That's fantastic. And we'll go back to you, Eric. Please resolve that cliffhanger.
Thank you so much, Xander and Emily. And also a big special thanks to our friends at The Deck of Many, who you can check out at thedeckofmany.com. It's a tool that GMs can use that free us from traditional reference books and allow us to bring only the references we need. And next week, Sam, you're in the chair. Who are you going to be talking to next week?
I'm talking to Amy Dallin about homebrewing, about game designing right at your own table.
Which is really relevant because that's Callisto 6. We basically took the cipher and homebrewed our own game.
I'm excited.
I can't wait to see that. Thank you so much for being here. We will see you guys next time on Game Masters Hall. Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to stay whimsical.